Hi, everyone. Good morning and welcome to the healthcare panel. In light of the COVID-19 pandemic, the scrutiny of the resilience, our investments, as well as the challenges in our healthcare infrastructure have never been more timely or more needed. So wanted to say a big thank you for joining in on that very important conversation this morning. Let me also welcome to the stage and introduce our group of panelists today. We have Ewan Davis, the Director of Quadria Capital, Lim See Wah, Chairman and CEO of Hyphens Pharma, and Kemp Dolliver, CIO of Cherrystone Hill Capital Management. We also have a few more panelists who are making their way into the room right now. I think they're just having some technical difficulties, and they'll join as soon as they're ready. So let's get going with our current three panelists. So good morning, y'all, and thanks so much for joining. Just a quick intro question. How has COVID-19 changed your company, your product, or your strategy? See Wah, maybe we can start with you.
Good morning. Okay, I think this COVID situation is definitely not the comfortable situation that we are in. I think it is shocking everybody with the speed in which things are changing. So I think if you are looking at it, all of us are looking immediately to assess the situation and monitor the changes in the operating environment rapidly to see how we can adapt to the overall situation, right? So definitely that is the first order of the day, to monitor, to adapt, and to ensure that we continue to operate and capture whatever opportunity that may come, mitigate whatever threat there would be. On a longer term basis, I think what we see is that the overall economic fundamental as well as the basis and the thesis of our operating strategy remain pretty much unchanged. I think as a company, we are today Singapore's leading specialty pharmaceutical and consumer healthcare group with an intention of growing ourselves into a leading pharmaceutical and consumer healthcare group within the ASEAN context. And I think that intention and strategy remain intact. Thank you.
See Wah, can you speak a little bit to the changes in demand that you've seen over the last 3 or 4 months?
In fact, if you are looking at our Q1 result that we have just released, we actually have got a good double-digit growth in our top line in Q1. And so I would say that in Q1 itself, there is actually an increase in our overall business. And if I'm looking at the April NODAX for Singapore, in fact, if you think about it, Singapore's NODAX has actually had a surprise increase in April, thanks to the fact that there was actually robust demand globally of the pharmaceuticals. I think it mirrors that.
Great. Ewan, let me turn it over to you. How has COVID-19 changed your perspective and your view on the overall healthcare landscape and the investments that you're making?
Thanks. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me on this morning. I mean, clearly, COVID-19 presents a challenge to all of our businesses, but we do believe it's only temporary. You know, we have exposure to healthcare services through some of the specialized hospitals that we own around the region. We have exposure to pharmaceuticals and also pathology diagnostics. Fortunately, all our businesses are well capitalized. Management teams were very quick to focus on managing costs as cash flows in some businesses became a little bit constrained. But interestingly, what we're seeing is two things. One, we're starting to see recovery in those businesses already. We're across Southeast Asia, so in places like Vietnam, for example, where the pandemic was handled very early and with quite drastic measures. We effectively lost a quarter, but actually growth is now reverting to trend. Patients that need to have a stent put in their artery for coronary disease, the patient that needs that hip replaced, those issues don't go away. So whilst they couldn't be treated over recent months, those patients will still need those procedures. So the demand is delayed, but we're confident it comes back. One of the other interesting trends that we've seen is the change in consumer behavior. So most notably in Indonesia, where we have a large investment in a pharmaceutical business there, we have a large business segment focused on consumer health. And actually, we are struggling to manufacture enough of our consumer health and wellness products to keep up with demand, as the consumer is changing their behavior, to their health and their immunity, and you know, using products that we produce as well as our competitors. So I think, you know, not to understate you know, the dramatic challenge that COVID poses, but you know, healthcare is secular, it's defensive. The need doesn't go away. The consumer demand is arguably greater, and actually this situation somewhat provides a tailwind to many healthcare businesses. So I believe that those healthcare businesses that can manage themselves through the temporary storm or chaos, or you know, impacted quarter or quarters, will actually emerge well positioned to take advantage of some fundamental opportunities, as you know, the way that we consume healthcare you know, grows and evolves in the aftermath.
Sure. So it sounds like you've both seen pockets of demand, and you mentioned some demand in many circumstances where they couldn't previously access healthcare services. Do you have any predictions as to how long this boost and demand might last, or is it here to stay? Do you think it'll kind of trickle off as the world, I think, regains some semblance of normalcy?
Well, I absolutely think it's here to stay. I mean, I think this pandemic has been a wake-up call, and interestingly, in my view, to the so-called developed part of the world, the developed economies, which, you know, one may argue have struggled to deal with the pandemic as decisively and as effectively as many of the countries in Asia have been able to do. You know, it highlights a fundamental lack of infrastructure and technology to test and manage these outbreaks. It also speaks to a lack of access to care, and I think it will be it's a call to arms for government and consumers alike to make sure that you know, healthcare infrastructure you know, is amended. And you know, the consumer demand will drive greater change, new product, new service, new channels of engagement going forwards. I also think from a private equity investor perspective, this presents great opportunity, because as we've seen, you know, for the longest time, you know, governments in this part of the world are not spending enough on healthcare. There's a huge funding gap which they will not be able to solve overnight, and so at least for the next 10 years, there's a tremendous opportunity for private capital to help address some of these issues. I'll pause there and let some of the other panelists have a say.
Yes, thanks. See Wah, actually, do you want to speak to that as well? Are you any internal forecasts or what you're thinking about in terms of how long this boost in demand will last?
I think if you are looking at it, of course, different people are speculating with regards to why there is an increase in demand. Perhaps it could be people are stocking up a little bit more, right, in anticipation of what is coming. We heard anecdotally that some doctors are actually giving more medications to the patient because they are not expecting them to come back to visit the clinic soon. So that could be a reason why there could be a spike in demand as well. But I think if you are looking at it, like what Ivan has said, at the end of the day, healthcare is really an essential needs. And if you are looking at it, there could be an increase in demand initially to stock up, and then there could be some disruption because of service delivery. But if you are looking at the underlying factors, essentially it is a matter of the economy, consumption power. With increase in consumption power, I think the demand will grow. And at the same time, the moment service delivery normalize somewhat, I think there will be again an increase or in fact a significant rebound in demand. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Kemp, welcome to the stage. Glad to see you got your technical issues fixed. So let me ask you the next question. What role do you think the private sector has to play in the healthcare system here? And how do you think that the balance between private and public is likely to change after the pandemic?
The private sector has had a significant role in the region in that it serves the upper end of the population for these countries. And the upper end of the population tends to be more demanding with regard to the nature of the services they receive. So there's this very unique balance of people who are paying in to support the public systems, but are not drawing resources from it. We don't have that model in the US, but looking at it from the outside, it has some clear advantages. When you look across the region, many countries, the bed counts, the medical staffing counts are well below what you see in other parts of the world.
And then obviously there's been a lot of focus, I think, on the localization of healthcare supply chains as well. How do you see that particular trend playing out? What does that really mean for healthcare companies operating in Asia? Sorry, this is to all the panelists.
It's Ewan. I'll answer briefly and let others comment. Look, I think not just specific to healthcare. I think we're gonna witness a period of localization. We've been talking about globalization for the longest time, but look what's happened in this situation. So there has been a push, certainly within healthcare, to localize production of medical devices, of drugs. Governments will ask that if you're going to be importing drugs, that there's technology transfer, so that know-how, that capability, that technology, comes on shore, and countries can start to become more sufficient. So there's always been a drive for that to happen. But with the supply chain shock as a result of COVID, I think it's become an imperative that is accelerated. So I am sure that you will see greater investment, greater incentive to localize aspects of production and manufacturing, across the healthcare space. It takes time. As my fellow panelists will attest to, it's not easy to develop, manufacture drugs. You don't just go buy it off the shelf from one country and plug and play. These things take many years to do. But the good news is, again, I think there's a renewed impetus and an imperative to do just that, and that will be a real boon to the industry in this part of the world.
See Wah, do you want to speak to your specific experience and how you're kind of thinking about your own supply chain for Hyphens?
I think if you are looking at it today, of course, we are quite distributed in terms of where our sources of supplies are coming from. If you are looking at it, there's no running away. Eventually, it is still a function of the economic fundamental. How are we going to get the most efficiency? How are you going to make sure that you are balancing risk versus the efficiency of how you are sourcing your products? I think immediately there's going to be a knee-jerk reaction to be looking into seeing how things are going to be localized. But eventually, I think there's going to be some kind of equilibrium, because if the calculation comes up to say that going to be producing everything locally is going to be costing so much more, and the market is not going to be paying so much more for what you are going to produce locally, eventually, I think the economic sense will still have got to prevail somehow.
So, I definitely agree. I think obviously there will be localization not just in healthcare, but across the board. So how do you think, based on the existing healthcare infrastructure that we have here in Asia and specifically in Southeast Asia, how do you think the Asian healthcare companies will fare in terms of their MNC counterparts? Kemp?
Well, think of it in a little bit different context with regard to, say, biopharma, for instance. There are companies in the region that after 5 to 10 years of pretty significant R&D investment are now introducing globally competitive products to the market. The biggest challenge for them once they get approved in their home markets or in the region is to globalize, and they'll typically develop, license out or form partnerships with global companies in order to get global distribution scale.
Ewan, any thoughts on this one?
Could you repeat the question, please?
How the Asian companies will fare in comparison to MNC competition in a new, potentially more localized healthcare landscape?
Well, I mean, they fundamentally very, very different markets. From our perspective, when you look at the developed markets, the payers for healthcare, a government, private insurance, whereas in Asia, the vast majority, 80, 90% is still being paid, paid out of pocket. So the markets function very differently. Look, I continue to believe that, the growth that we're seeing in Asian healthcare, far outstrips that of what we see in the West, and that therein lies the opportunity. So the strong incumbents in Asia with strong business models that really play to the fundamental story of huge consumer demand, huge volumes of consumer demand. Consumers that pay out of pocket and are very price sensitive. Companies with business models that can deliver quality product services at low cost to the masses are going to have a competitive advantage over others. And they've had experience of playing in these markets and playing to those fundamentals for some time. And I think that puts them at advantage over some of the MNCs that try to come in with more Western market pointed philosophies. So tremendous opportunity in Asia.
Sure. So let's talk a bit more about the actual investment landscape. Across the board, deal flow is generally down. What are you seeing in terms of the overall investment landscape, as well as the capital raising environment for companies, for healthcare companies in this current era? Kemp?
The fundraising environment for healthcare has remained pretty solid in the region. Between Hong Kong and the STAR, we've had 5 transactions price, or IPOs price in the last 2 months, raising about 1.4 billion US. There have been several secondary transactions also. There's been some M&A activity, particularly in India in the healthcare services space.
Okay, and we just had Jonathan join. Jonathan, welcome to the stage. Sorry about your technical issues.
Hi, I'm sorry. I have a bit of problem with the internet for some reason.
No worries. So Jonathan is the CEO and co-founder of Halodoc. And actually you joined just at the right time. So this question is for both you as well as See Wah. So you know, you guys are in relatively well-positioned industry, both telemedicine as well as specialty pharma. So where are you looking to invest or expand for your own businesses at this moment?
Okay, so I think the last few months, things have tremendously changed in terms of the healthcare landscape, the way people look at healthcare. So Halodoc is a bit of a platform. It's a platform that connects patients with every parts of the healthcare ecosystem, doctors, pharmacy, hospitals. We provide telemedicine, but we also manage patients to get to the hospital. So we are not just a telemedicine player, we are actually a platform player. Now, the biggest changes that happened in the last few weeks have been how people are being pushed to feel comfortable with the use of technology like Zoom, like what we are using today. Now, a lot of people now feel a lot more comfortable to work with Zoom because it's a lot more effective, efficient. You don't have to move. You can basically get your things done. Now, one of the, and in my opinion, this will also have a big long-term impact in the way healthcare is being triaged, or how people want to stay for the good in talking to doctors or their specialists doing treatment and everything. We had a 300% week-on-week growth of usage in total, I think. So because of that, and we see the cohort on an extreme number, like people are using it on a week by week basis, have jumped tremendously. The basket size of medicine order also have been growing like by 38%, and the rate. So I can and the age group of this, from before it was 20 to 30 years old or 35 years old as a focus. Now I have a big group of people in the age between 40 to 50 years old. So I think there's a big change of market landscape that just happened like so instant that I didn't expect to happen in a month. So I would, if your question about investment, yeah, obviously I would try to invest in how. Well, the big thing is we are already in that changes, but I'm sure there's a little bit of small details where like for example, how we are the largest drive-through rapid test in Indonesia for COVID. Mm-hmm. I believe a lot of things will be done from drive-through in forward. Like for example, people to get vaccination over drive-through, injection of vitamin C over drive-through. So a lot of things will be done over this touchless way, combined with telemedicine.
So like more rapid adoption and changing consumer behavior for your part.
Exactly.
Okay. See Wah, what about you? Any thoughts on where you're looking to invest and expand to kind of, I won't say ride through the COVID-19 trend, but somewhat like that.
I think I'd like to echo what Jonathan has said, in the sense that historically, if you are looking at the entire healthcare sector, it is probably a relative laggard when it comes to technology adoption. If you think about it, how medical service is being rendered today, it's probably not drastically different from what it was, say, even 4 or 5 decades ago. The skills and the things that you have is changed, but the service model has not. And so I think this COVID definitely has become a catalyst that is accelerating the entire landscape when it comes to technology adoption. So as a player, if you are looking at it, I don't think the needs and the demand has changed. However, I think there are always ways and means in which efficiency can be built and things can be enhanced. And so we are really looking into seeing how digitalization and the adoption of digital technology can become a business enabler on the one hand. And we are definitely looking and seeing also where the landscape has changed so much that there could be opportunity for transformation of the kind of thing that is happening out there, and we are definitely looking into that. But beyond that, I think we are by and large still a product company, and we are certainly steadfast in seeing how we can continue to bring product innovation to the market, right? Because I think the fundamental thesis about how ASEAN as a whole, in terms of the economic development in the next 5 to 10 years, I think that still remains intact, and the consumption will increase.
So thank you. We have a few questions from the audience. I think just enough time to answer it. So from PY Hor, between pharma and medical apps and AI, where do you think the growth is higher?
In my opinion, I don't think we have to take a look at healthcare landscape as one that is supporting one to the other. So let me bring you a very simple example. You cannot just say, I want to see a doctor without getting a blood test, without getting a prescription of medicine, and to consume a medicine in the same as a patient. It's part of the whole patient journey. If you basically want to have a problem solved in your healthcare. Medicine is a tools of healthcare. Application of healthcare is another tools, which both of them are interrelated with regards to problem solving of healthcare. So the fact that there is a big change of landscape or consumer behavior that is happening, I would assume both of them will go hand in hand. It's just how the medicine or future of medicine is being used. Like, for example, the future of medicine is targeted therapy medicine, and what the future of diagnostic, among others, will be going into what they call the digital biomarker. Like today, there are applications that you put it in your pockets by the use of artificial intelligence. They basically can make a prediction of are you going to get Parkinson's disease, for example, or are you going to get relapse cancer? Just because they basically evaluate a set of data that happened in the last 30 days or the last 60 days to understand the pattern of your walking, the pattern of your movement, the pattern of you talking to a doctor. Now, all of that is an improvement of diagnostics by the use of technology and application. But medicine, a targeted medicine would be focused on, for example, like cancer therapy, whereby now they can use the genome medicine and so on. So I would say it's a totally two different landscape. Medicine would be a bit of a longer return, but it's definitely still a big tools for healthcare, while application is a new method of therapy and a new method of diagnostics. That's my view on things.
Ewan, do you want to tag along to this question in terms of where the investments are for both? And you also have a question from the audience. So with higher state spend likely around the corner, aren't we looking at peak returns for the private healthcare sector?
It's good question, but I do not believe so. I do not think that the states will be able to spend anywhere near enough money to address the investment deficit. Putting Singapore to one side is more of a developed economy, of course, but looking at the emerging Southeast Asian nations, I mean, they're spending 2-3% of GDP on public healthcare versus the WHO, but arguably what do they know? The recommended level is 10%, versus the US, which is off the scale. So there's such a vast amount of underspend that, you know, yes, government will spend more, but will they spend enough? Nowhere near enough in my view. So I would say there's still at least another decade of
now back up.
investment.
See Wah from Lanka. The biggest risk for the pharmaceutical sector globally has been over-dependence on the Chinese healthcare supply chain for API intermediate drug requirements. Do you think this is going to change going forward?
I think if you are looking at it, like they said before this, there's definitely a pure pursuit of saying what is going to make economic sense. I think with this crisis, people are going to factor into the risk because people know the risk. It's not that they don't. It's just that until the risk materializes, it's just a risk. Now it is real. So once this happens, I think definitely there is a quest to diversify the sourcing of API. However, whether there will be countries that is able to bring the speed up so rapidly, and then on the other hand, what is going to be the economic consequence? Because if you are having two different generics, API is an important part of the cost, unless the procurement agency within the country are going to recognize the fact in saying that, look, you know, I'm going to take into consideration the source of API as part of the equation of how the pricing is going to be factored in, then I think it could have meaningful change. If eventually, if you are going to have a tender and price is still going to be the primary factor, then you can't run away from saying that I still need to source from the cheapest API source. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I think that is all we have time for today. So thank you to all the panelists for participating this morning, and sorry about some of the technical difficulties, but really appreciate all your insights and on such an important topic, especially in these current times. So thanks everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.